Welcome to the RotoWire Prospect Podcast. I'm your host, James Anderson. We're brought to you by Winn. And I got a special guest this week. Clay Link is off, but Geoff Pontes from Baseball America is here. As I alluded to or referenced in my last article, I think Geoff's article from this winter on the best pitches in the minor leagues is one of the best articles I've read all off season, and I think it's must read material for not only people in dynasty leagues who I'm sure have been all over it and should have Baseball America subscriptions and everything like that, but I think redraft players and people who do draft and holds can really learn a lot here because this is kind of ground that you can't just find from doing your own research, right? So I thought having Geoff on would just be a really, really fun show. But first, Geoff, how you doing?
Doing great, James. I appreciate the warm introduction and just coming back onto the show. It's probably been a little bit, but always one of my go-to podcasts. And I think at this point, probably one of the longest running prospect focused, dynasty focused podcasts out there. So congratulations on another season, man.
Yeah, appreciate that. We were talking before we started recording. Like you've got such a fascinating kind of story of sort of your evolution in this industry. You started at Rasball roughly around the same time I started doing my prospect rankings at RotoWire about 8 years ago. And then you started Prospects Live, which was very highly acclaimed. It's still an awesome site. People should definitely support Prospects Live. But then now you're with Baseball America, and I mean, I got to imagine it's been kind of a whirlwind of 8 years or so. What's it all been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable because when I had first started doing this, I think, a big part of it was I loved fantasy baseball and had really kept up on content over the last couple of years, specifically like 2009, 2010, around the time that like I bought my house and my wife and I were having, my oldest son. And, you need something to kind of pass the time. Like, we lived in Boston before that and we went out all the time and we traveled and like did stuff that like young married people would do. And like I was in like fantasy leagues, but it wasn't like the kind of thing where like I really kept up with it. But I can remember, I think it was 2009, and it's funny because I want to say it was either 08 or 09, but it was whatever the year was where like Cliff Lee broke out. And I had drafted really well. I think I had Lance Berkman, who had like a crazy first half, and I had picked up Lee like the first week of the season off the waiver wire, like in his big breakout year with Cleveland. And I think some people could probably resonate this or, with this is you have a breakout like that and you want to like chase the dragon a little bit. Like you're like, I really like that feeling of identifying this player and being like, wow, like, I could do research or find out more. And how can I get better at identifying these players? And so that kind of brought me down the rabbit hole. And I used to read a lot of Yahoo at the time. Like I can remember like Andy Behrens and, a lot of those guys, Scott over there, or even like Brad Evans. Like I read a lot of their stuff and like picked up on a lot of their styles. And it eventually led me to a Friends and Family League post. And they talked about Gray Albright as like the Hunter S. Thompson of fantasy baseball. And as a big like fan of Hunter S. Thompson, like since I was in high school, I was like, I got to read that guy. And so I went over there and I really loved the community that Rasball had at the time. And like the RCLs were like really competitive leagues. And I can remember getting like my teeth kicked in and sort of like wanting to learn more about like game theory and some of that stuff. And as I got better at that, I was in the chats and the comments a lot of all the posts at the time because it was different. Like a lot of the interaction at that point, I felt like was on site versus like on social media, which is what it's transitioned to since. And I got to know a lot of the writers, and eventually I kind of asked like, how could I get into this? They had a DFS job that somebody needed to cover like Saturday mornings or Sunday, like a day nobody wanted to write. So I took it, and it was perfect for me. I had kids. I worked during the week, and I wrote it on Saturday, and it did fairly well. And I started like trying to organize contests every night, like throughout the baseball season. And there were so many game days in baseball that you could really like get some momentum doing that. So I did that. I tried to write at a few other sites, like sister sites, at Razzball, and just do DFS lineups every day. And I got better at writing, etc. And eventually I got the 2-start pitcher post over there, that came out on Saturday mornings. That was just, people planning their starters for the following week, particularly in head-to-head leagues. So I did that. And eventually the prospect guy at the time, this is probably late 2014 or 2015, just didn't want to do it anymore. He got burned out, and the job was there. Gray asked if I wanted to take it. And I had been around minor league baseball. I grew up around the Pawtucket Red Sox. Grew up, going to 40, 50 games a year for, a better part of my youth, and really watching, I watched some of these great Braves teams come through as like the Richmond Braves. And like, I saw a lot of players. So I had a concept of, minor league baseball and the teams that were out there, what the layout was, and had always played dynasty leagues and had been really big into it and gotten a little bit into the draft. So I did that. And I think my big thing at that point was we were a 50 player top 50 prospect list, and I went to like a top 100 and then went like further. And the other big thing was like, ranking like 50 draft guys as opposed to just like the top 10, which is what I think the standard was at that point. I think people forget, like, before like you and I and like the Welsh and some of these other folks, Dynasty Guru Tom and Brett, before that, it was like a much shallower dynasty landscape that like I think ushered in this age of like a lot of deep league content. And I look back 4 or 5, 6 years later, and I'm like, wow, like we didn't realize at the time that there were going to be a lot more 20-team leagues than there ever had been, that there were going to be, 30-team leagues and all these different varying formats and deeper minors and everything else. And, around that time, I think 2016 or 17, you did your first, top 400 list. And then that kind of became like the next standard, and bigger lists came out. But I think it's funny to start from like this little thing I did on my, on the side, to like bigger and bigger stuff, to then, I got more into the baseball side of things as I went to more games, and I wanted to do video, and I wanted to talk to scouts, and I wanted to learn about how to identify amateur players that could potentially be MLB players one day. And that outlet really wasn't right at Razzball. Like I needed something different, and Gray understood that. And he's been, a great mentor and friend to me since I started there. And I started Prospects Live, and, it was a bunch of us: Jason Panini, Lance Brozdowski, Matt Thompson, and Jason Waddell. And, Lance works for Marquee Sports now. Jacob Zweibeck, who was one of our first employees, now got hired by the Padres. Jason Panini, who I think is probably, from like the scouting perspective, I probably learned the most from, worked for the Twins now for 3 years. And then Jason Waddell, who I know, we had our issues, but we've become good friends again and gotten really close. And, a lot of those guys have like, steered the ship. And then, Eddie came aboard, and Smata, and Matt always being one of my best friends. It was hard to sort of make that call and tell them, hey, I got an opportunity here I can't pass up. But at the same time, it was incredible to see that I was, on the radar of JJ Cooper and the guys from Baseball America. Somebody that I had always read and looked up to, and thought of as like a different tier or whatever, to be able to come in and have people who like really believe in me and empower me to do what I want to do, and say like, no, you got this. Like, I'm going to let you run with this. That's really cool. That's the best part of it. Not the fact that, I don't have to do sales any longer, and I'm in a better mood because I'm focused on baseball all day. That's a big improvement. But the people that I work with, and the team, and the people I've had an opportunity to come up with like Gray and Matt Thompson and Eddie and Jason Panini and, of course, Smata. And then now, what my future is, Carlos Collazo, all these people. I know I'm ranting, but it's true. Like to me, it's like every day, this is like, I get to live the dream. This is the major leagues to me, and that's pretty neat.
Yeah, dude. I mean, it's a really great story, and I mean, you deserve it. You've never really been satisfied. I mean, you've always been kind of looking for sort of the next frontier in terms of player analysis. And I mean, that brings me back to the article you wrote that we're going to be discussing here. I've learned a lot from you just in terms of the new sort of frontier of pitch analysis, which has become incredibly important in the major leagues, obviously, but I mean, certainly when we're analyzing prospects. And I think that's what is so valuable about this article, is that you're giving the reader info that they can't get from just going to a player's Fangraphs page or Baseball Reference page. And it's incredibly valuable information, especially for, I think we've got a really loaded class of pitching prospects right now who are in the upper levels. We might see 12 or 15 or even more than that guys who are in my top like 120 debut this year. And that's just really exciting, but I think it presents a challenge for redraft fantasy players and people doing draft and holds, because I don't think you should ignore these pitching prospects just because they're pitching prospects. You shouldn't get carried away necessarily either, but I think there's a lot to learn, and I think that people should really kind of pay attention to this, because we are going to see a lot of these guys in the majors this year. And so, I want to start with Shane Baz and Aaron Ashby. We don't have to spend a ton of time on those guys, because people can obviously do their own research on Baz and Ashby. They were in the majors long enough, I think, where we can at least draw some conclusions about their stuff and how good it is. But they both featured prominently in the article, as you would expect. Is there anything that you wanted to kind of share regarding those two specifically?
Yeah. I think the thing with Baz that's really interesting is, I think it's honestly, it's the case with both of them, but it's the quality of the arsenal, just like across the board on both of these guys. And I think that's what is really so unique about Baz as well as Ashby. And the thing with Baz is, I kind of thought he was like a sinker baller guy, like that's kind of what he was when he got drafted by the Pirates. And we've seen what the Rays have done in terms of developing pitchers, and a lot of organizations, but the Rays are one in particular that does a good job of like accentuating their positive characteristics. And, it's actually Mikey Aiello, who I think wrote it for Baseball Prospectus, but he had comped him. This is when Baz first came up, looking at the data to Garrett Cole, and it is remarkably similar. And I mentioned it in the article, just in terms of the shape of all of the pitches, the release height, velocity range, down to just even like the locations. And I think, when you look at a guy like Baz and the body that he has and what projects out to be, he's always been a really strong kid. He has potential for 3, 6 or better, or, plus or better pitches, and potentially, 2 true 70 pitches in his fastball and his slider. As for Ashby, he's just a really interesting pitcher. I think that we get really caught up in everybody needing to have like this high ride 4-seam fastball from like a low release. It's like, hey, it's Jack Leiter. Like, everyone needs to throw like a fastball like that. When in the reality, I mean, he throws a sinker and it's really good. And, he gets a lot of ground balls on it. And then he's able to, mix in a good changeup and, a good curveball and a good slider, and give, a lot of different looks to batters. And, he's successful because of that. And I really like him. I think he is one of the better pitching prospects that's out there. And the other thing is, the more that we learn, the more we start to trust certain organizations. And I think that his development path in particular has sort of followed a trend that we've seen with the Brewers with, 3 really, really good starters now. 2, that have been among the best starters in baseball over the last 24 months.
Yeah, totally. I don't really have anything to add on those two. I mean, I think that's really what it is, and I think it just kind of comes down to workload and volume, and that's sort of how you go about valuing those guys in redraft leagues. This next guy is someone who, obviously has had a long track record of missing a ton of bats. I dug in on his numbers in the majors and was very impressed by how far the sliders come. Obviously, the curveball has been a weapon for a while, but Reid Detmers, there was some good you could take away from his debut. There was also some bad. The fastball actually kind of got hit pretty hard by big leaguers. But you mentioned in this article that his fastball had the 5th highest whiff rate of any fastball thrown by a pitcher in the Baseball America Top 100. And that kind of gave me a bit more confidence in terms of buying in on Detmers as a guy who could break out this year. How do you expect his repertoire to play in the majors this season?
Yeah, I think the thing with Detmers we have to recognize too is he's remade himself as a pitcher a little bit. So when Detmers first sort of came into the league, sort of came out of the draft, he was threw slower, frankly.
Right.
And it was a slower curveball. It's a more traditional type of curveball. But he's a guy, and I've been doing a podcast with Baseball America called 90th Percentile. I've been talking to actual pitching coaches, trainers, and I've talked to Tom House, Chris, Langen. I talked to Sean McGrath, who was George Kirby's pitching coach at Elon, now is Arkansas AA affiliate of Seattle's pitching coach for 2022. And a consistent thing that sort of comes up is if a guy throws a curveball that has some sweep and the arm action is a certain way, you can tell that guy can throw a slider. Reid Detmers is a perfect example of that. So he learned to throw a slider, or had a slider, but he throws it more, and it's a better big league pitch. Curveballs will work in the amateur ranks because guys aren't necessarily as good at picking it up out of the hand or identifying the depth. But once you get to the pro ranks, what we see is the curveball strike rates really drop, and the reason for that is because guys stop chasing them and can identify, like, all right, this is an easy take, and even if I take this at the bottom of the zone and it's a looking strike, it's 50% of the time. Most of the time, we're going to get a ball, right? So guys typically have to really have a slider or a changeup to be successful. There's other exceptions with curveballs that more often than not, like a Nick Lodolo, or what Matt Brash calls a slider, that are like sweeper curveballs, which we can get into that. We can talk about that in a little bit. But Detmers added a gyro slider, like Max Meyer, where it's really tight. It's that bullet spin, that classic slider that if you're behind home plate, you talk to a scout, they say you can recognize the red dot. It's that kind of a slider. And he throws it hard. He throws it, on average between 85 to 87 miles per hour. And once you get above that 84 mile per hour threshold with secondaries, but if you throw a curveball and you actually throw it 83 to 84, you're going to miss more bats than one that's 79. It's the same thing with sliders, that you don't have to have as much movement if you do throw it really hard. Detmers does that. He had a really good strike rate on it, like an elite strike rate on it, had a high whiff rate on it. It's hitting the zone. It's forcing guys to make a decision to swing. And when it is getting swings and misses, when it is getting swings at 40% of the time, it's getting a miss. That's really good. And for a pitch that really only has, we'll say, a year and a half to 2 years of like full development, that's pretty good, especially when you're talking about a guy that's facing the upper level competition in the minor leagues, and then the majors are baked in there. Shape of the fastball has always been good. All he really needed to do was add power. He dropped his release a little bit, which added the vertical approach angle. Some of that might have just been the motion in terms of getting more out of his lower half, more efficient in terms of the arm action or just sort of motions, timing. I don't know specifically what it was that Detmers really, changed and refined, but in the end, he's able to get really good shape, and he gets vertical ride, he gets higher above average IVV number, at an average of 93, 94, 95 miles per hour, where this is a guy that had that shape at 89 to 91 at Louisville. So I think that's what I focus on, is those two pitches. Plus he has that curveball still. He can use that as an early count strike stealer, especially a guy like Detmers that has the command to really sort of pinpoint it at the bottom of the zone. There's few guys that can do that. And he's got a solid changeup. So, I think ultimately, he'll be able to sort of work around it. But, I'm not shocked that major leaguer, hitters were all over him as a guy that didn't have a ton of experience against upper level competition, particularly, major league caliber talent even.
Yeah, I mean, he got sent to Double-A directly without ever pitching below Double-A professionally. So, yeah, I look at what he did, his body of work in the minors last season. It's really, he put up like video game numbers. If he had success in the majors last year, you wouldn't be able to draft him after pick 400 like you can in some drafts. So, I mean, I think he seems like just a guy where he has everything you would kind of look for in a long-term, mid-rotation starter and his track record of missing bats is just really hard to ignore.
Yeah, no, 100% agree.
Another guy that we got a brief look at in the majors last season, but we just got one start, so it's not a ton to work with in terms of analyzing what he's got, is Roansy Contreras with the Pirates. You ranked his slider as the second best slider in the minors in your article. What can you tell us about that pitch and the rest of his repertoire?
Yeah, I really like Roansy Contreras. He's probably one of my favorite pitching prospects that I wrote up heading into 2021. Unfortunately, it was a report that I don't think ever saw the light of day because he was traded to the Pirates, and we had already done that board, and we were so backloaded at Prospects Live at the time that I never had an opportunity to get it up. I think we maybe eventually did get it up, but I love the fastball because he's got a ton of velocity. All right. His average last year was like 95, 96 miles per hour. He gets a ton of ride in the fastball. He's smaller with a more vertical arm slot, or like a high 3/4, but he's really able to accentuate that and have an above average sort of lower release height. It's not super low. It's probably about, I think, just below 6 feet. But he's unique in the sense that he's able to get ride from a lower slot the way that he does. So it's one of the reasons the fastball plays up, and he's got good command of everything. So one of the things that I like about the slider in particular is he pounds the zone with it. It's way above average. We'll say on average, a slider strike rate is 60, 61%. Last year, he was like 66%, 67%. He shows the ability to sort of, land it, hit those zones that he needs to. You don't have to have pinpoint control, but you just got to sort of hit these buckets, as I like to call them, or the triangle, when you talk about like the four-seamer high and your breaking ball glove side and, your change-up arm side. He's able to hit those, and it's hard. It's another slider that's more of a gyro slider, so it's really tight in terms of break, and it's unique in the sense that he has two distinctly different breaking balls. He also has, a curveball that is harder. It's a harder curveball. It's a low 80s curveball that has significant two-plane break. So he's getting, drop and he's getting sweep. And when we look at the numbers and dig into it, and I've, done some work with, one of my former colleagues, Dylan White, over at Prospects Live on this stuff. when you have heavy two-plane break, in velocity, it's typically a breaking ball that's going to generate a lot of whiffs. So it translates to a lot of swinging strikes and a lot of whiffs. Both those pitches had above 50% whiff rates on them, and that's really unique. I think him and maybe Cade Cavalli were actually Cavalli's slider is below 50, so he might have been the only guy that had two breaking balls that had whiff rates above 50%. So really unique. Contreras, and then he's got a change up as well. It's not quite as good, but it's a 4-pitch mix, and it's a true sort of power arsenal with good pitch shapes and unique release characteristics, which I think is always really important.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty glowing report. I think he made one start at AAA to go with that one start in the majors last year. Do you think he has much left to show in the minors?
I think the biggest factor for him is durability. I think that's the biggest telltale sign of whether someone's a reliever or a future starter is the ability to handle a lot of innings, but also, and I've heard this time and again from pitching coach Sean McGrath from the Mariners actually mentioned to me earlier today, is it's the ability to make your best pitch as many times as possible throughout a game. Like that's what defines a starter. And the guys that are able to, from pitch to pitch, execute, whether it's, 80 pitches, 90 pitches, at like an 80% success rate, those are the guys that are ultimately going to be starters. Contreras doesn't have that latter issue. The bigger issue for him is health and not getting hurt. He is a smaller guy, and that is always the big concern with some of these smaller pitchers that a lot of times have really unique data. So I think that's sort of, if I throw any sort of warning label on Contreras, it's going to be, he needs to prove that he can throw 150 innings year in and year out and maintain that level of stuff and velocity and unique shape that he has, and strike throwing ability, right? Because injuries certainly can manifest themselves and walks and balls. So yeah, I'm still in on Contreras. I really think that he could be interesting this year, especially if the Pirates, let it ride. He's on the 40-man. There's no reason not to. He's already had his debut. We'll see, what comes in the coming CBA, if any changes at all, to service time and how that's manipulated. But regardless, even if it's the same system as before, this is a guy that should be up in May and should only make a handful of starts in AAA at most.
Excellent. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about Hunter Greene and Nick Lodolo of the Reds. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. If there's one thing we appreciate here at RotoWire, it's making good decisions, and even more so, making the right decision. Listen up, folks. I have an incredible offer for you with RotoWire's newest partner, WynnBET, the premier digital casino and sportsbook app. WynnBET is now the exclusive sponsor for RotoWire's fantasy podcasts. WynnBET brings you all the latest action with a user-friendly interface, moneyline bets, boosted parlays, over-unders, round robins, live betting, and so much more at your fingertips. Want a break from sports betting? Head into WynnBET's digital casino and take a spin on roulette, double down in blackjack, slam the slots, or try your hand at baccarat. WynnBET is currently available in 8 states: Arizona, Colorado, Indiana, Louisiana, Michigan, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, while rapidly expanding. At WynnBET, the possibilities are limitless. WynnBET is currently offering all RotoWire listeners a risk-free bet up to $500 on your first wager. Download WynnBET now. That's WYNNBET. WynnBET, the exclusive partner for RotoWire's fantasy podcasts. Experience a new way to play daily fantasy sports on Thrive Fantasy. Thrive Fantasy is an exciting player prop fantasy contest. With Thrive Fantasy, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top-tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Sign up for Thrive Fantasy today and receive a free 6-month RotoWire subscription. Here's how you claim your free RotoWire subscription. Visit rotowire.com/thrive, deposit a minimum of $10 and receive a 100% deposit bonus up to $100. Play in your first paid contest and receive a free 6-month RotoWire subscription. All right, Geoff, we're back. And as I said, we're going to talk about the two Reds guys, Hunter Greene and Nick Lodolo, who, it seems like there might be a shoe to drop here after the lockout, where several of the Reds' veteran arms could be on the move, or at least one or two of them could be. That's obviously to be determined, but it does seem like Hunter Greene and Nick Lodolo will be spending a good chunk of the year in the big league rotation if they can stay healthy. And they're getting drafted fairly highly in NFBC draft and holds for guys who haven't pitched in the majors yet. So I think the market is sort of anticipating that. What can you tell us about their strengths and weaknesses with Greene and Lodolo that could impact their results in 2022?
Yeah. And I think the big thing here too is, when you look at these two arms, Greene is, of course, on the 40-man roster, which puts him sort of ahead of Lodolo, I think, in terms of, when he's going to necessarily be on the, active roster at the major league level. They could be fairly quickly. There's no reason to delay it at this point. There's only so many bullets that you have in these arms too, right? So I always think it's best to sort of maximize that. Now, Lodolo probably, he's a non-roster invitee to camp, not on the 40-man roster, so he's probably going to be showing up soon, giving you a little bit of a head start. But I think ultimately he's a guy that once a spot opens up, and with some of these trades, it should pretty quickly. Lodolo could be up, a few weeks after Greene. And I think, each of them has the ability to help out in, a variety of different roles. Greene, we know, of course, throws really, really hard. Average fastball velocity, only guy in the top 100 who averaged above 98 miles per hour. It's closer to 100 than it is actually his average than it is 98, to be frank. And we know, the heights that he can hit. He does get some hop on that fastball as well. He's got some good arm side run. It's above 17 inches in terms of induced vertical break. I think it's above 9 to close to 10 inches of arm side run. It's fairly flat in terms of the vertical approach angle. So the numbers are okay. They're pretty good. He doesn't have George Kirby type command of the fastball, but it is above average fastball command. He gets enough swings and misses on it. When you throw 100 miles per hour, it will work. The shape isn't bad. So I think sometimes he gets a raw deal a little bit on the fastball because people do see it get hit. It's still a fastball. There's a lot of good fastball hitters, regardless of how good your fastball is, unless it's completely alien. You're still going to get hit on it, right? So numbers still aren't bad. He commands it, like I said, fairly well. He holds velocity. He pitched a lot of innings at the highest levels this year of the minor leagues. It's a lot to like. He's got a great slider. He's got a plus slider, maybe plus. Tons of velocity on it. It's a little bit tighter. He's got a little bit more horizontal break than a couple of guys that we had previously discussed in Contreras or even like Shane Baz, which is a little bit tighter. He's a guy that does get a little bit of sweep on it, not a ton, but he throws really, really hard. The average on that pitch is 87 to 89 miles per hour. Manifests itself in above 45% whiff rate, and he's above 60% in terms of strikes. So I really like Greene's slider. I like it more than his fastball, even though the fastball gets all the headlines because of the triple-digit velocity. I think the slider is truly his best pitch. His issue is the changeup. It's shape-wise, it's not bad. He's got good, about 10 miles per hour velocity separation on average. He'll get whiffs. The issue with that pitch is he does not get it in zone nearly enough. And I won't throw out what the strike rate is on that pitch, but it's well below 50%. That's an issue. I think that's the biggest thing. If we see a Greene come out this year that has that slider, that fastball velocity, and then is able to add, some command of the changeup, we might potentially see a guy that really could be a dominant starter. But at worst, I think, he's a guy that could probably slot in, particularly to the Reds, the middle of the rotation, give him good innings, get some strikeouts, have some really high moments, and some other games where, he blows up your ratios in fantasy, quite frankly.
Yeah. I mean, is he the type of guy? I mean, he sort of sounds like the type of guy where he could be frustrating, where he's capable of dominating the best lineups and also getting chased early against the worst lineups, just depending on whether he's got it that day.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I think it's what it's like, one of those where your your ratios get destroyed and all of a sudden like you're like, oh, I can't start this guy against the Yankees. And then he goes out and, pitches 7 shutout innings in Yankee Stadium and strikes out, 12 batters and like Aaron Judge 3 times or something. Like he's that guy. Yeah, absolutely. That's totally who he is. And we've all, I think, rostered a player like that or two over the years.
So, yeah, I mean, my sense with Greene, I haven't taken him in any of my 5 draft and holds. I sort of think he's a guy where I might be pretty interested in him next year. But Nick Lodolo is a guy who I actually have ended up with, I think, in one of my 5 drafts. What's his recipe for success?
Yeah, Lodolo is just super sweepy. He's a sweepy left-hander, a la sort of Chris Sale, really low arm action, and sort of the way that his arm and body moves. It's sort of like that. It's really funky. But the thing with Lodolo is from that low slot, he's able to do a few things that are really unique. And the fastball, he's got velocity, he gets hop, he gets ride from that really low slot. It's not a ton of ride, like it's not a number that would jump out. It's like 10 inches of induced vertical break, but that's a decent number when you consider sort of, how he throws, plus, you mix in, the sweeping, element of the fastball. So he gets a ton of, arm side run, and it looks like it's sweepy out of the hand. It's really weird that, the fastball sort of comes out one way, like almost like a slider, but breaks, the complete opposite direction. And then, there's the slider or the curveball that is just really a sweepy breaking ball. It doesn't have much vertical movement at all, but it breaks over a foot glove side. When you have a fastball that comes out like the slider and then moves the opposite direction of the slider, that's a really nice 1-2 punch. You don't really need a whole lot else beyond that. So he has a really sweepy breaking ball that he does call a curveball. But it's would have slider elements, and he's got feel for the changeup. He's one of the guys that has, sort of a close to negative IVB, meaning it doesn't get any ride at all in his changeup, coming from that same slot, and it's a really interesting look. So if it all breaks right, he could be sort of like a discount version of Chris Sale in terms of how he looks and how he throws. Just I don't think he's going to be a Hall of Famer his first 5 years.
Yeah, and how about the command? I mean, it in the draft, plus command was the kind of the big selling point with the deep arsenal, and then it does sort of seem like he's been a good strike thrower in the minors. Do you see him? Do you see that being a strength for him right away?
For Lodolo, yeah, I think it's tough. I think that he will have games where people sit off of the curveball and the changeup and might get some fringe called strikes that he might have gotten in the minors, and they'll end up getting balls, and he'll work up counts. So I think that could happen. He does command the fastball really, really well. So I think that's that's going to allow him to sustain the success, I think, over a long period of time.
Okay, so this next guy, probably just on paper, the best pure stuff of any guy we're going to talk about, but he has not pitched in the majors yet. Grayson Rodriguez. I mean, I know you're really excited about Rodriguez's stuff, and obviously, anyone who follows prospects closely is certainly well aware of his stuff and his upside. But can you sort of tell redraft players about what Grayson brings to the table?
I might need a second. Are we live? My wife didn't get home, and now my kids are getting off the bus, and I have to legitimately open the door and run outside.
Dude, you got it, man.
Cool.
You're at that. Geoff taking a quick break. Yeah, so I mean, with Grayson, I know that my ranking on him has been somewhat controversial, outside my top 20, but inside my top 25. And it's just, it's not like I'm not ranking Grayson on the scouting report, all the 6s and 7s. I'm factoring that in, and then I'm factoring in the likelihood that his tools and his ultimate upside translate for fantasy players, because there's really, Geoff's about to go on a really impressive breakdown of Grayson's pitches, the upside, just how incredible they are. But, I think most people who analyze prospects would have gone on similar excited breakdowns of guys like Forrest Whitley, Alex Reyes, Mackenzie Gore in recent years. And those guys, their stock kind of peaked at AA for the most part. And that was the last level that Rodriguez pitched at. Doesn't mean that he's destined for the same fate that those guys have dealt with, but it's just, they should be warning signs, in my opinion, about this could be the time to trade Grayson Rodriguez in dynasty leagues. But he has stayed healthy. That's really kind of going to be the key to Grayson Rodriguez. I think coming close to this ceiling. I mean, most pitching prospects that people get this excited about never reach their ultimate ceiling. And so I wouldn't be expecting that from Grayson Rodriguez. But I think if he stays healthy, just given the quality of his stuff, as Geoff's gonna really break down, he's gonna be very valuable in fantasy. I mean, he's gonna miss a ton of bats. He's not gonna deal with any sort of lefty righty splits because of how deep his repertoire is. The news about the park in Baltimore, the fence is moving back. Obviously, that's good news. Derek Carty had a really nice breakdown on Twitter last week about how Baltimore is actually going to play as kind of a neutral park, something close to that at least, in 2022. And so, I mean, that's good news, not only for guys like Grayson Rodriguez and John Means, but that's good news for guys on those other teams in that division, Shane Baz, the guys on the Yankees. If you turn Baltimore into a neutral park, that could help a lot of different pitchers in that division. Geoff is back, and I just gave my thoughts on Grayson Rodriguez and just sort of why I have him ranked where I have him ranked. But I want you to kind of tell the listeners just about why it's so easy to just really get caught up in how special he could be.
Yeah, I think it's the combination of feel for a full arsenal of pitches. Like, he has 4 pitches that, he has above average strike rates and above average whiff rates on, and that's just unheard of. He's got really unique shape. He's got a negative IVB changeup, which means it actually which you never see, which means it has true tumble. It actually has drop to it. And that's with a fastball that has ride that, he commands at an elite rate, with hop at 97, 98, 99 miles per hour. He's got a really good curveball. He's actually have a legitimately excellent curveball. And then a really good slider, and he'll mix in a cutter variation. And he commands all of it, and it gives him the ability to sequence everything. It's a big body, but he has a lower release, and he gets, a flatter vertical approach angle and all those sort of things. So metrically, he jumps off the page. the big thing with him is like, is the body going to hold up, and can he throw, 100 to 120 pitches per start and go from there, and be a legit starter. All right. Hold on 1 second again.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to touch on DL Hall here. DL Hall has really, really ridiculous stuff as well. I mean, I think the Orioles guys, the two guys that top a lot of their lists, along with Adley Rutschman. I mean, it's just monster stuff. Hall comes with much more risk from both a health standpoint and a command standpoint than Grayson Rodriguez. But, I think just given where Hall is in his development, how far he's climbed in the minors, and like you said, Geoff, earlier, just about there only being so many bullets in that arm. I mean, I think if Hall is healthy this spring, they are not going to slow his ascent to Baltimore this summer. Well, what type of track do you see Grayson Rodriguez being on this year? Like, when do you think Baltimore kind of pulls the plug there on his minor league development?
I think the thing with Hall is like his stuff is so unique. The command is a little better than we think. It's just the issue with him is like innings, right? The durability element with Hall is a major question mark. And that's the one that, I don't know if ultimately he can overcome. I don't think they'll ever necessarily have him as a reliever in the minors. But when he is ready and they have him up in the big league level, it might be as a bulk reliever or, an opener for like 2 or 3 innings. And he sees the lineup one time. I think the big question for him is like, do you have to limit his innings? I mean, the stuff wise,
right?
I mean, he has some of the best left-handed stuff in like not just the minors, but like baseball. It's like Blake Snell and DL Hall. And he's got 4 legitimate pitches. And I mean, a fastball that sits 97, 98,
And then with Rodriguez, I mean, do you think he's up? I mean, because they kind of have these guys that they're sort of faces of their rebuild. A lot of them are nearly done with their minor league development. Do you think that they're all brought up around the same time? Do you think they want to see anything more from Grayson at AAA?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing with him is like how they're going to handle a service clock and, some of that stuff. Because there's no reason for them to push it still, even if whatever, the system changes somehow, there's not a lot of incentive for them to necessarily call him up. I do think we do see him this year. I don't think he's somebody that's necessarily going to be, seeing like 120 innings in the major leagues. I'd be shocked if he sees, that sort of level of usage. But I guess you never know. I think the thing for him is going out this year. We're going to see him for at least a month in AAA, if not more. And can he go out and do 6-7 innings consistently over the course of a month plus, hold his stuff? And then I think the sky's the limit, because how he performs there could, if he does what he did in 2021, replicates that in AAA in longer stretches per outing, there's no reason for them to keep him down. There's only so many bullets,
Yeah, I mean, to me, I mean, if let's say he's impressive in spring training, whatever spring training ends up looking like, and then he has the same type of run at AAA that like Alek Manoah had last year. I mean, could that be basically sort of his track? Like,
exactly. I mean, that's exactly what it is. There's like, it's going to be one of those things where there's no reason. The only thing Manoah really had going for him that Baltimore wouldn't is Baltimore probably won't be competitive this year unless there is like an Angels in the outfield sort of situation and something, wild changes there. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'd be shocked if it does. So I got kids probably fighting as they got off the bus upstairs. But yeah, I mean, it's that's the only thing I'm pushing against them is the fact that they don't have to do anything,
Yeah, but I mean, I hear that. It's just, to me, like, if you're starting Adley's clock, like if Grayson, like I don't think anything you said about Grayson's pitch mix is wrong. I just don't see why you wouldn't just like the worst thing that could possibly happen is you just keep Grayson Rodriguez in the minors for like a month or two more than you should, and then he gets hurt in the minors, and we don't see him until 2023 or something like that. So to me, I would just let him kind of be up whenever he's ready. But
which I think is probably what's going to happen. I just I think there's always, you got to be somewhat pessimistic about any pitching prospect and any organization that's just not competitive. But you never know. And I do think, like, from a development standpoint, which I think is what's most important to them, that's probably the right thing to do. And I think eventually it's why we will see some Grayson this year, but yeah, I mean, you don't want to see a Brent Honeywell, right? I mean, that's what happened with him, more or less. Like, he should have been up before that injury for a month, and the Rays didn't do it. He kind of complained about it. I think he got suspended and gets hurt the next offseason. So, it's unfortunate.
So the guy that in this article that we're talking about, which you can find over at Baseball America, the guy who really, I think you sort of swung me on the most in terms of where I had him ranked versus where I ended up ranking him on my last update is Brandon Williamson, big lefty with the Mariners. Obviously very impressive numbers in the minors, but I was unaware of the non-velocity components of his fastball that made it such a dominant offering. And then obviously he's got some secondaries to go with it. Looks like a starter. How do you feel about Williamson's arsenal on the whole?
Yeah, I think the thing with Williamson is really unique is he does have 4 pitches. He's got 2 different breaking balls. The curveball is really slow, which, like, shape wise, it looks good. It's visually sort of aesthetically pleasing, but it's not necessarily as functional as maybe it had been when he was at TCU. But what I do think is really interesting about him in particular is it's like the arm action and his release height has this deceptive component that doesn't necessarily translate to, like, the numbers. He's a higher release guy. It's more like over the top, which is why he gets as much, ride as he gets. I mean, him and, like, Peyton Battenfield are, among, the 2 minor league leaders in terms of, like, induced vertical break, or IVB. Part of that is he's a big guy with an over the top release, right? And, that obviously has some impact on induced vertical break and, creating a more clean backspin on the baseball. He's able to do that, and I think has some deceptive characteristics that we can't quite fully measure yet. That his fastball at 91 to 94 miles per hour plays as well, if not better, than Grayson Rodriguez's fastball at 97 miles per hour. Jack Leiter's fastball against college competition, because I actually have that mixed in, like, my big spreadsheet that I put together when I sourced all this information over the course of a month and a half, a ton of phone calls and everything else. But it played better at 2 miles per hour slower against AA competition and better. And the thing with Williamson is, like, he's a lefty, so the velocity thing, even if it's a little slower, it kind of plays up a little bit. But he's a lefty with, like, insane ride on his fastball. You don't see a ton of that. That's very infrequent. So it's a really unusual look. It all but neutralizes left-handed batters, and it's going to miss a lot of bats at the top of the zone against righties too. So I think, that's sort of like the linchpin that everything falls around. And then, you mix in the fact that he does have a slider from that arm action that's pretty unique. It's more of a cutter. He throws it for a strike consistently. Then he mixes in that breaking ball, which does have sort of that two plane of drop and sweep component that we talked about before. It's just really slow. So it's a unique curveball that if he threw it at 80 miles an hour versus 75, 76, it might be like a double plus pitch, but it's still a usable pitch that he throws for a strike consistently. And then his best secondary might actually be his changeup, which has for the amount of induced vertical break that he creates with his fastball it's sort of the opposite on his changeup. He's really, for a guy that has that sort of spin efficiency on his four seamer, to be able to kill lift or ride on his changeup from a similar slot, that's a weapon. And I think it's one of the reasons that his changeup is his best secondary in terms of everything. And then I talked to his pitching coach, recently, one of the stops that he had in the minor leagues last year. And, he talked about how much of a competitor Williamson was. And just, he's a guy that, talk about somebody who, he's like, he goes out there and he competes every single pitch. There's a focus every single pitch. And one of the things that this guy actually talked to me about was, what he notices about starters versus relievers is what guys do in between each pitch, that like how quickly do they get back and focus and then execute. And it's like the guys that can consistently do that 100 times throughout a game, those are your starters. And Williamson is a guy that has that sort of makeup, plus the pitch mix, plus the stuff, plus the unique sort of deceptive characteristics. I think he could be a really good starter. But he's a pitching prospect, and things, guys get injured and they lose it. But he's a guy too that, like, when we dug in and we made calls, because that's the way Baseball America puts together these lists. It's not just our opinion. It's sourced. We're building out our top 30s, and that's all sourced from talking to scouts and front office people and opposing scouts and player dev people and analysts on the analytics side, and getting all these reports together. We do that all through from September until December when we put the handbook to press, and then we sit down, take off a couple of weeks for the holidays, and come back and we put together the top 100. And Williamson was a guy that we kept on, him and Jeremy Pena, we kept on getting better and better and better reports on. And he's just one of those arms that I think, like, for you, even for us during the process, our eyes were really open to how good he was. And then getting some of the numbers behind it, it was like, okay, this all makes sense. The light kind of came on.
Yeah, we gotta stick with the Mariners here, just because I know you did just get done talking to one of their minor league pitching coaches who's worked with all three of these guys. And I mean, much more famous than Williamson are George Kirby and Matt Brash. Kirby, obviously well known for his command and his stuff ticking up after the draft. Brash, whatever you want to classify his breaking ball as, one of the best breaking balls in the minors. Can you break down sort of where George Kirby and Matt Brash are in their development, and maybe sort of handicap these three Mariners pitchers in terms of who might be fastest to that big league rotation?
I think Brash is probably the first guy in the rotation. And I don't think I ever would have said that a year ago. I don't think anyone in their organization would have said it a year ago. But the more I dig into Brash, the more I watch Matt Brash starts, as we need some baseball to fill the void here with nothing going on, especially until college starts in, about a week or so. I've dug in a little bit on Brash and watched all of his starts, and this dude's a starter. Like, legitimately, even if it's mostly two pitches and it's all arms and legs coming at you, he competes, and every time he's out there, it's just, it's legitimate stuff. So he has a slider that, I call it a curveball in the article. I really took some poetic license, I guess, there, simply because there's a lot of good sliders.
Right.
And pitch type is most like Nick Lodolo's curveball. If there's two pitches that are most similar within the breaking ball space, it's that within the top 100, it's probably those two. And it also, in terms of internal systems and how they look at transverse spin versus gyro spin, that's a whole other tangent we can go down. But sweepers, or, horizontally moving breaking balls with very little vertical movement, have a high level of transverse spin, much like a four-seam fastball, um, much like a top spinning curveball. So it's just a curveball that moves like this versus like this. And I think that's why a lot of these machines, just to draw a line in the sand, they mark a lot of those sweepy breaking balls as curveballs. Where, reality, if it's whatever the pitcher calls it, he does call it a slider, so it is a slider. But that is a 70 pitch, and he's got a great fastball. I mean, and the changeup isn't bad either. So, he's a guy that I think just like across the board, he has the stuff, he has the arsenal, and he's got the 40-man slot, which at the end of the day is one less roster move that they have to make. It's one less decision they have to make in terms of their control of that particular player. I do think we will see Kirby this year. I think we'll probably see Williamson this year as well, but they don't have to have a decision made until December on their 40-man. So they might squeeze a couple extra months out of it. And, we see Kirby and we see Williamson in July. That all being said, they're a competitive team. They got a lot going on in terms of the roster and some of the pieces that they've added this offseason. I mean, they added a Cy Young Award winner, reigning AL Cy Young Award winner, correct? So, I think those guys all have major league roles. When you look at the back end of that rotation, you look at Justin Dunn, who I've loved for a long time, but I don't think can probably offer what any of those three guys can if they are what we think they are. That potentially they could be a 6-man rotation and they have some extra arms here to play with. Chris Flexen has actually been really good, still pretty young, and has, a good contract. So I don't know. I mean, we'll see. One of these guys, I think, potentially could get moved as well. Can never have too much pitching. You know how injuries happen. Guys find themselves in roles. But I think Brash has a better chance of being within that rotation coming out of camp than people realize. And I think he's got a better chance of sticking as a starter than people realize, just because of how much he competes, how good he is, and the way teams are using bullpens nowadays. If he's 5 and dive and nasty, I don't think they're going to care. I think they'll take those 5 innings and they'll realize that maybe they get him back with Marco Gonzalez, but I think they're all starters. I think they all have unique characteristics that make them starters. Kirby's is the best fastball command of a great fastball in terms of shape and velocity of anybody in the minor leagues, maybe. He really just knows how to command that to all, 4 quadrants, as Jason Panini used to say sometimes. He's got 9-quadrant command, but he even has sub quadrants sort of like between the quadrants in terms of how he can land that fastball. The big thing for him is development of the secondaries. We talked about Williamson, and we haven't even gotten into guys like Emerson Hancock that are in that system. So they just have a ton of arms, a ton of talent, and they got talent at the major league level. So Seattle's really interesting. I think all those guys are going to fit into the puzzle this year, though, and could be sort of valuable because of what they can do and what we can see they can do just in terms of how they throw the baseball.
Yeah, you and I both play in the Devil's Rejects Dynasty League, and Eno Saris made it clear to me very early in the offseason that we were keeping Matt Brash.
Yes.
So very excited to see what he can do in the big leagues from a strikeout standpoint. Obviously hope all those guys can stay healthy, because that's a ton of arm talent on the way. Things are finally maybe trending up for Seattle. Sticking in that division, before we kind of get to some other guys that maybe I haven't thought about that you might want to touch on. Cole Winn with the Rangers, his changeup and curveball both got recognized in your article as 2 of the better pitches in the minors. And obviously, I think if you look at the Rangers rotation, I mean, you can crack that rotation when you're ready. How do you think Cole Winn fares this year when he gets to face big league hitters for the first time?
It could be rough initially. I think it could be up and down. I do think that he will be a guy that consistently gives you a fighting chance to get quality starts. Dealt with injuries, but last year showed some durability. I like the mechanism and the motion. He's really athletic on the mound. It's really smooth. He gets a lower release height on his fastball, gets a lot of vertical break in his fastball, gets vertical approach angle, a flatter vertical approach angle. He's a around 4.5-degree VAA type guy. If you've read, some of Alex Chamberlain's work, he's touched on the importance of that vertical approach angle. So I think that's one of his big strengths is he has a really good fastball, and he averages 93 to 95 miles per hour. He's right there in terms of major league starter average. The slider, really tight, sort of more of a gyro slider, but he commands it well. So that's one of the reasons that I liked it. I like the curveball a lot because he's one of these few guys that throws it really hard. He throws it above 80 miles per hour, and he has more than a foot of drop on it. So he's getting this, he can play the vertical game with the four-seam fastball, with the flat approach angle, land that high in the zone, have guys swing under it, and then he can, beat those same swings underneath with a curveball coming from a similar slot, tunneling very similar, that then just absolutely drops off a table. And it doesn't have a big hump on it because it's coming in at a higher velocity. So it's not one of those big rainbow sort of curveballs like Colby Allard had that we used to say, wow, look at how great this curveball is. And then we learned when we learned more about movement that, oh yeah, Colby Allard's curveball like that isn't as good. So he kind of avoids that because of the velocity on it. It's one of my favorite curveballs that, I broke down and looked at. And I think the other thing that, he has going for him, as you said, is he has feel for a changeup. It's about 7 or 8 miles per hour separation on average between the fastball and the changeup, which is fine. It's a little bit above average. That's good. He's not a guy that has a ton of tumble like Grayson Rodriguez and some of these other guys that we've talked about, but he does have, fairly good shape, and he gets a lot of arm side run. To be honest with you, changeup shape really doesn't matter as much as how you throw the changeup, how you locate the changeup. And, the thing going for him is he locates his changeup as well as Hunter Greene locates his fastball. It's the same rate. So to kind of give you an idea, he's got good command of a full set of secondaries. He can play sort of the East-West game a little bit more because of his fastball command. He can do it because of the break on the slider, as well as the break on the changeup. He can land all 4 of his pitches for strikes at a consistent rate. And he's got a really unique curveball in that it has a lot of break with a lot of velocity. So I think he is a guy that could crack their rotation. And I think right away could probably give you, number 4 starter sort of numbers, which if you're in deeper leagues like James and I are, in a 20-team league, that's not that bad, especially for the price that you probably pay. And, I think probably the same for some of these draft and holds where he'll be a lot cheaper than some of these other guys that are going off the board earlier with guaranteed rotation spots that may not necessarily see as many innings as Cole can. And I think has shown the ability to probably handle that amount of innings next year. I mean, you look at that rotation with the Rangers, as you mentioned, Taylor Hearn is in there. AJ Alexi I've always liked for a long time, but still it's AJ Alexi. Spencer Howard, and even Dane Dunning. I mean, the only guy that's he's a starter and will be in this rotation is John Gray. Everybody else, I don't see why Cole Winn, former first round pick, couldn't potentially crack it.
Yeah, staff ace John Gray, staff number 2 Dane Dunning. I would say Cole Winn has a very easy path into that mix. Geoff, who are some guys? This is really the question I wanted to ask you most, saving it for last, because it's going to be guys who are not in the top 100 of Baseball America's prospect rankings. But who are some guys who maybe would have made this article with a pitch of theirs in terms of one of the best pitches in the minors, but they just didn't qualify because they were not a part of the Baseball America top 100?
Sure. Just thinking about fastballs, there's a couple of guys here like Colby White, who's on the 40-man roster, I think now for Tampa Bay. shocking, another Tampa Bay arm that you haven't heard of that's going to be really good. That probably will be like in a pen roll or, a bulk roll. But he's a guy with like, we break down fastballs and look at some of the characteristics. He really jumps off the page. So, he's a guy that, I would definitely throw some shine on. Christian Chamberlain, who's a lefty who actually, I think, played at Oregon State with Nick Madrigal and Adley Rushman, and Stephen Kwan, who's soon to be the next like big star there, right? But Chamberlain's another guy that's like really unique in terms of how he throws, and gets a bunch of velocity, gets a bunch of hop on the fastball. He's really unique. So he's a guy that I would throw out there. I think Nick Nastrini, who I believe came from UCLA. He's a Dodgers prospect, one of the guys they took, I think, in the 5th or the 6th round. He's really unique. He's really special. I think he could be like this year's, him or Emmett Sheehan are going to be like this year's Landon Knack. They're going to be the guy that you're like, how do the Dodgers figure out this guy was so good in the 5th or 6th round? And it's because they're looking at how this fastball breaks and some of the things that it does. Other one I'll throw out there is Bryce Miller. I think Bryce Miller has a really unique fastball that he may only be a reliever, but he was drafted out of Texas A&M this year as a senior sign by the Mariners. And it is already one of the better fastballs in college last year. It already rates as one of the better fastballs in the minor leagues. As far as like overall player, I'm all on, and big shots to Nate Hardy, who I've been talking to a lot from Pitcher List. He's a really smart guy. If you guys didn't follow him, check him out on Twitter. And he does his work, I think, in a unique way that he goes and he just watches pitching prospects and he just kind of writes notes and then just ranks them off of what he thinks on what he's watched. So, I may disagree with him at times, but I think like he's done the work. I think he has really unique work. So I want to put some shine on him. He's really into Cody Morris from Cleveland. And I had to reach out to him. This is how we initially started chatting. The reports that I were getting on Cody Morris from people within the organization and outside the organization prior to the lockout were absurd. I mean, like, this guy's a number 3 starter. This guy could be better than half the guys in the top 100. We think this guy is, a legitimate starter. And you look at his background, he had some injuries, he dealt with some of that stuff. Cody Morris is very legit. He's a guy that was off a top 100 that I think like I would take him in all my draft and holds this year. And if it's deep enough, because you could probably get him in round 50 and it might be worth it.
Can't get him in round 50 if I'm in the draft.
No, there you go.
I mean, he actually, I do think he's
ranked fairly highly.
Yeah, I mean, he's going. People like the redraft crowd is actually on him because of just how insane his numbers were in the upper levels last year, and just the Cleveland thing. There's still sort of that aura around the Cleveland pitching development. So. Cody Morris. I mean, the secret's out. I think you're totally right. Nate Handy, one of the best guys out there in terms of analyzing minor league pitchers, and he reached out to me, made it very clear that I was too low on Joey Estes in my last update, and he made a strong case. So I mean, you should definitely be following Nate Handy. I believe it's at Pitching Specs, if I'm not mistaken, on Twitter. Yep. But yeah, I mean, Cody Morris, I honestly, when I asked you that question, I was kind of like, say Cody Morris, just say it. I know you want to say
it. Tommy Ramiro is another one that I like a lot. Freddie Tarnock, who I think we talked about a couple weeks ago. The more I've dug in on Tarnock, the more I like him, man. There's power there. Joey Estes is another one I like. And Bailey Falter, who is a guy that could see some innings this year, he's got the weirdest four-seam fastball that it moves in a way in terms of the measurement systems versus how it actually looks at the hitter, that it's a bizarre pitch. And I think he could potentially be like a really good, in deeper leagues, like a good, if you save holds, like he could be a good like holds guy, or maybe even a starter. Maybe he even sees like some innings. But Falter's another one I just want to mention here that like he kind of jumps for me a little bit. On some of the systems that I've put together.
I remember I think I've told a couple people this so far this offseason about Bailey Falter. Like I think I think he has a better chance to start than the Phillies do. So I don't know if he's necessarily in the right place. But yeah, I mean, that's a good one. And yeah, like Tarnock, man, that fastball breaking ball combo is just really hypnotizing if you watch him.
Yep.
But he's not a finished product, but definitely a guy that could break out this year. Geoff, before I let you go, why don't you let everyone know where they can follow your work and what you might be working on right now at Baseball America?
Yeah, so you can obviously follow my stuff over at baseballamerica.com. We just released the handbook this year because of some of the delays, with printing for whatever reason. It's not going to be out until probably like late February, early March is what we're hearing. So we released it and available to everybody as a PDF. So if you do order the handbook, we'll still send you the handbook. If you buy it, we'll also send you a PDF version of it, which is great, I think, for fantasy baseball players and also anybody who's attending games that maybe brought the handbook or looked at it before. Because now you can look at it on the go. You can pull it up on your phone. You can search the names throughout the entire document, all 900 scouting reports. And like I said, this stuff is heavily sourced and based on our conversations with people in front offices, rival scouts, their coaches, opposing coaches. So, a lot of this information goes above and beyond even what we're seeing. And then, we then take a look at it and then sort of measure it up against the data and say, does this actually add up to the player that, in the production and the things that we're seeing? So I think that we took a different approach this year to the handbook. And I think it's going to produce some of the best results and reports that we've seen historically. And I think, that's going to be something that's going to be a standard for us going forward. So, catch up on that. And then I'm finishing up right now my last college pitching post where I've been going through 4 draft eligible starters going into their draft eligible year here that's coming up in the next couple of weeks. We'll have 20 total starters that are all ranked within the Baseball America 2022 MLB Draft Top 100 rankings. And I just go through in an analytical perspective, break down what they've done. I actually watch, because we have synergy access at Baseball America, I get to watch all of their college for 2021. So I watch all their Team USA, all their Cape Cod footage if I haven't already seen it. And then I watch all of their starts and I just make notes. And then, I have access to some data from 2021. I take a look at the numbers. I talk to, analysts around the game, kind of bounce off my thoughts. And then I put all that together and I break down each pitcher from an analytical perspective. And we even look at baseline stuff as like, what do they throw? How hard do they throw it? How does it move? Those are really the questions that I want to be able to answer. And then maybe say some suggestions at the end of, this is what could happen in pro ball. These are the kind of characteristics they have that project really well in this particular area. And so I've done a few of those. They're called Future 4. You can check those out. And then I'm doing an MLB draft college top 25 that should be coming out next week, where I actually went through, I looked at all the schools in the bonus pool era. So since 2012, sorry, UCLA, you missed out on that Garrett Cole, Trevor Bauer class. But from 2012 all the way to 2019, because I wanted to give myself a 2-year buffer for even the most recent class, at least have some guys get to the major leagues. And I look at total picks per school. I look at total bonus dollars, spent on players per school. And then I look at top 5 round draft picks per school. And then I add up the WAR from each school throughout all those classes. And then I put it all together and I have a formula where I ranked out the top 25. And then I have some bubble schools and stuff. And I want this to be an annual thing where every year, the week before the kickoff of the college baseball season, we update it. We talk about the new top 25. We talk about what players and what classes. And I even go through and highlight the top WAR player from each of the top 25 schools and the top pick player and the top bonus player. So I think it's just an interesting look, something that we can do in the off season. But, a lot of content along those lines. So we'd be diving in more on some pro stuff. I've been working really closely with JJ Cooper on the Rule 5 draft. So I'll be doing some Rule 5 draft stuff coming up. So yeah, just really trying to touch on everything pro based, whether it's the draft, whether it's, prospects. And then once games start, once the minor league season starts, my plan this year is to be at 130 minor league games.
Man, sounds like you're a kid in the candy store right now.
Yeah, man.
So happy for you.
Thank you, James.
You've been really generous with your time. You gotta subscribe to RotoWire, but you've also gotta subscribe to Baseball America. I would not be able to do anywhere near as good of a job as I do without my subscription to Baseball America, and I really mean that. Thanks so much, Geoff. We will talk soon. This has been the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, the RotoWire Prospect Podcast, brought to you by WynnBET.